We heard you bought a luxury villa in the Alps, so we came to live with you and make peace. My daughter-in-law declared this at my door, pushing her luggage inside without waiting for an invitation. I did not block them. I stepped aside and let them enter. But when they walked into the main hall, they stopped cold at what they saw. They stood frozen at the sight. Their smiles vanished instantly because they expected a palace, but they walked into something else entirely. Before I tell you what they saw and how this decision ruined their lives, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a greedy relative a hard lesson. My name is Conrad Sterling. I am 72 years old. For 40 years, I was the man you came to if you wanted to build a skyscraper in Manhattan. I dealt in steel concrete and air rights. I lived my life in the noise of the city, surrounded by people who wanted my money, my influence, or my signature. I was good at it. I made a fortune. But 2 years ago, I realized something important. I was tired. I was tired of the noise. I was tired of the fake smiles. And most of all, I was tired of my own family. So I sold it all. I liquidated my portfolio. I sold the penthouse on Park Avenue. I sold the summer house in the Hamptons. I converted my empire into cash and diverse trusts, and I disappeared. I told no one where I was going except my lawyer, Mr. Stone. I wanted silence. I wanted to drink my coffee without hearing a siren or a request for a loan. I found that silence here in the Swiss Alps, right on the border with Italy. It is a place where the air is so thin and cold, it feels like it scrubs your lungs clean. The snow falls here in heavy, silent sheets, covering everything in white. It is isolated. It is dangerous if you do not respect the weather. And it was perfect. I was sitting on the terrace, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, drinking black coffee. The steam rose from the cup and disappeared into the gray sky. It was 10 in the morning, but the sun was hidden behind a wall of storm clouds. The forecast said a blizzard was coming, a big one. I did not mind. I had supplies. I had solitude. Then I heard it. The sound was alien in this landscape. It was the grinding roar of a diesel engine struggling against the incline. I stood up and walked to the stone railing. Down the winding mountain road, a large black transport van was fighting its way up the snow-covered track. It was not a local vehicle. It was a long-haul taxi service, the kind you hire at Zurich Airport for exorbitant fees. I watched it approach. I felt a tightening in my stomach. No one knew I was here. No one except Stone, and he would never send a courier without calling first. The van reached the iron gates of my property. I had left them unlocked because the delivery truck with my firewood was due later that day. The van drove through the gates and skidded to a halt in the courtyard. The engine cut off. The silence rushed back in for a second, only to be shattered by the sound of doors slamming. I walked to the front door of the villa. It is a massive thing made of solid oak reinforced with iron bands. It looks like the entrance to a fortress. I opened it and stepped out onto the cold stone of the porch. 2 people were climbing out of the van. The first was a woman wrapped in a white fur coat that probably cost more than the van itself. She wore high-heeled boots that were sinking into the snow, making her stumble. It was Brittany, my daughter-in-law. The woman who once told me at a Thanksgiving dinner that my generation had ruined the planet and owed her generation a living wage for existing. Behind her was my son Jason. He looked pale. He looked thinner than the last time I saw him. He was dragging suitcases out of the trunk. Not 1 or 2, I counted them as they landed in the snow. 1, 3, 5, 10. 10 large hard-shell Louis Vuitton suitcases. This was not a visit. This was an invasion. Brittany looked up and saw me. She flashed a smile that was bright, brittle, and completely fake. "Dad." She screamed it. Her voice echoed off the mountain face, disturbing the snow on the pine trees. "Dad, we found you." She started marching up the steps, leaving Jason to struggle with the bags. She reached the porch and opened her arms as if to hug me. I did not move. I did not open my arms. I stood there like a statue, carved from the mountain ice. She stopped a foot away from me, sensing the coldness radiating off me. "Hello, Brittany," I said. My voice was flat. "Hello, Jason. What are you doing here?" Brittany laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound. "What do you mean, what are we doing here?" "We are here for you. We heard you sold everything. We heard you were all alone in this giant old house. We could not let you spend your twilight years in solitude. We came to take care of you." She gestured grandly to the bags Jason was hauling up the stairs. "We are moving in, Dad. We are going to be a family again, just like you always wanted." I looked at Jason. He would not meet my eyes. He was sweating despite the freezing temperature. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who was running from something. "I did not invite you," I said. "I do not need taking care of. I moved here to be alone." Brittany's smile faltered but did not break. She was a professional manipulator. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Oh, stop being a grumpy old bear," she said. "You do not mean that. This is a villa, a luxury villa. We saw the pictures in the listing before you bought it. It has 10 bedrooms. It has a ballroom. It is too big for one person. It is selfish to keep it all to yourself. Besides, family is family. We forgive you for leaving without saying goodbye." She forgave me. The audacity was breathtaking. I looked past her at the taxi driver. He was back in the driver's seat. He had not asked for a signature. He had not waited for a tip. He had dumped the bags and retreated to the safety of his cab. He revved the engine. He looked anxious. He looked like he wanted to get off this mountain before the storm hit. "Wait," I said to Brittany. "You cannot stay. The weather is turning. You need to get back in that van and go back to Zurich." "No," Brittany said sharply. Her voice lost its sweetness for a second. "We are not going back. We sold our condo, Conrad. We have nowhere else to go. We are staying here." She signaled to Jason. "Bring the bags inside, Jason. It is freezing out here." I stepped in front of the door, blocking the way. I said, "No," I said. "You are not moving in. This is my house." Brittany looked at me. Her eyes narrowed. For a moment I saw the real woman beneath the makeup and the fur. I saw desperation. I saw greed. And I saw that she had calculated this perfectly. She knew I would not physically fight her. She knew I was an old man. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. She put her hand on my chest and pushed. It was not a gentle push. It was a shove. "Move, Conrad. We are freezing. We are coming in whether you like it or not." She signaled the driver. "Go," she yelled. The driver did not hesitate. He threw the van into reverse, spun the tires on the Alps ice, and shot out of the courtyard. He drove down the mountain road, as if the devil himself were chasing him. I watched the taillights disappear around the bend. Silence returned, but it was different now. It was heavy. It was dangerous. They were stranded. I was stranded with them. Brittany picked up the nearest suitcase. Jason grabbed 2 more. They pushed past me. I let them. I could have stopped them. I could have locked the door. But something inside me, a deep intuition honed by 40 years of dealing with sharks, told me to let them pass. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to see the moment the fantasy collided with reality. They are expecting a heated floor, I thought. They are expecting servants with hot cocoa. They are expecting the $20 million they think I have hidden under the mattress. "Come on, Jason," Brittany commanded, marching into the foyer. "Let's get settled. I want the master suite with the view." She crossed the threshold. She walked 3 steps into the main hall, and then she stopped. The suitcase fell from her hand and hit the floor with a loud thud. Jason walked in behind her, bumping into her back. He dropped his bags, too. I stood in the doorway, letting the cold wind blow past me into the house. I watched their backs. I watched their posture stiffen. I watched the arrogant confidence drain out of their bodies. They were looking at the interior of my luxury villa, and they were realizing that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. "Welcome home," I said softly, closing the heavy oak door behind me and locking the deadbolt. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed through the vast, empty space like a gunshot. "I hope you brought warm clothes," I added, "because it gets very cold in here at night." Brittany turned around slowly. Her face was pale. Her mouth was open. She looked from me to the room and back to me. "Where is it?" she whispered. "Where is everything?" I smiled. It was not a kind smile. "It is gone," I said. "It is all gone." The storm outside began to howl, battering against the stone walls. But the real storm was inside, standing in the middle of a room that was about to become their prison. Brittany placed her manicured hand on the heavy iron ring of the oak door. She pushed it open with the eagerness of a child on Christmas morning, expecting a pony, but about to receive a lump of coal. Yeah, I could see the anticipation vibrating in her shoulders. She was ready to step into a world of heated marble floors, crystal chandeliers and servants waiting with silver trays. She was ready to claim her kingdom. She stepped across the threshold, her heel clicking sharply on the surface beneath. But it was not the click of a boot on polished stone. It was the gritty scrape of a sole on raw, unfinished concrete. She took 2 steps inside, and then she froze. It was not a figure of speech. Her entire body went rigid, as if the air in the room had instantly solidified around her. Jason followed her in his head down, dragging the heavy bags. He bumped into her back. "Move, Brittany," he grumbled. "It is freezing out here." She did not move. She did not breathe. She simply stared. I walked in behind them and pushed the heavy door shut against the howling wind. The latch engaged with a heavy metallic thud that sounded like the door of a vault sealing shut. The sudden silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through gaps in the masonry that had not yet been pointed. I walked past my frozen children and moved into the center of the room. I turned back to look at them. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the exact moment their dreams died. The great hall of the Villa Moretti was indeed massive. It had ceilings that soared 30 feet high, supported by ancient stone arches that had stood since the 1700s. But that was where the grandeur ended. There was no plaster on the walls. There was no paint. There were just thousands of exposed, jagged bricks that smelled of damp dust and centuries of decay. There were no tapestries. There were no oil paintings. The only decoration was the spiderweb of black electrical wires hanging loosely from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the draft, like dead vines in a winter forest. The floor was a disaster. It was a slab of rough concrete poured decades ago and never finished. It was stained with oil patches, covered in a fine layer of gray dust, and littered with small piles of rubble where the previous workers had chipped away at the stone. And the temperature. It was actually colder inside than it was outside. The thick stone walls held the chill of the mountain like a battery storing energy. It was a deep, penetrating cold that seeped through the soles of your shoes and settled in your bones. Brittany's eyes were wide, darting frantically around the cavernous space. She was looking for the luxury. She was looking for the comfort. She was looking for the money. But all she saw was a construction site that had been abandoned. Her gaze landed on the only furniture in the room. In the far corner near a fireplace that was currently cold and filled with debris, I had set up my living quarters. It consisted of a folding army cot with a thin gray wool blanket, a cracked white plastic table I had salvaged from a roadside cafe, and a single propane camping stove sitting on a stack of bricks. Beside it was a can of beans and a manual can opener. That was it. That was the luxury lifestyle of Conrad Sterling. "What is this?" Brittany whispered. Her voice was trembling, but I could not tell if it was from the cold or the shock. This is a joke." "Right. This is the servants' entrance. The real house is upstairs, or through those doors." She pointed a shaking finger toward a dark archway that led to the kitchen. I shook my head slowly. I kept my face impassive, masking the deep satisfaction I felt at seeing her horror. "No, Brittany," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. "This is it. This is the villa. But the pictures," Jason stammered, dropping the handles of the Louis Vuitton bags. The bags looked ridiculous here, like spaceships that had crash-landed on a desolate planet. The listing. It showed velvet curtains. It showed antique furniture. It showed a library. "Those were staging photos, son," I explained calmly, walking over to my plastic table and picking up my tin mug. "Real estate agents can do amazing things with Photoshop and rented furniture. When I bought the place, it was completely empty. A shell. A skeleton." "But you bought it," Brittany said, her voice rising in pitch. "You paid millions for it. We checked the public records. You paid $4 million for this place." I took a sip of my cold coffee. "That is correct," I said. "I paid $4 million for the history, for the view, for the potential." "Then fix it," Brittany screamed. Her voice cracked, echoing harsh and shrill off the raw brick walls. "Where are the contractors? Where are the decorators? Where is the heat, Conrad? It is freezing in here." I sighed, a long, weary sound that I had practiced for days. "I am afraid that is the problem," I said, looking at them with feigned sadness. I underestimated the costs. Buying the property was one thing, but the taxes, the transfer fees, the structural reinforcements required by the Swiss government to prevent the roof from collapsing. It drained me. I walked closer to them, my boots crunching on the debris. "I am broke, Brittany," I said simply. The words hung in the frigid air. "What did you say?" she whispered. "I am tapped out." I continued lying with the ease of a man who had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions. I put everything into the purchase. Every stock, every bond, the proceeds from the New York penthouse. It is all in these walls. I have nothing left to renovate. I have nothing left to heat the place. I live on my Social Security check now. It buys enough propane to boil water and enough beans to stay alive. Jason looked like he was going to be sick. He swayed on his feet, his face turning a shade of gray that matched the concrete floor. "But you were worth $20 million, he choked out. "Where did it go, Dad?" "Money does not just vanish. It does when you buy a 300-year-old money pit in a foreign country," I said. "I made a bad investment, Jason. The worst of my life. And now I am stuck with it. I cannot sell it because it is in the middle of a renovation zone and no one wants a frozen castle with no plumbing." "No plumbing," Brittany shrieked. She looked at the bathroom door I had pointed out earlier. "There is a chemical toilet in the shed out back," I said, helpful. "And I melt snow for washing water. It is actually quite invigorating once you get used to it." Brittany looked down at her white fur coat. She looked at her Italian leather boots. She looked at the 10 suitcases filled with designer clothes intended for après-ski parties and galas. And then she looked at the army cot in the corner. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. The taxi was gone. The storm was coming. She was trapped on top of a mountain in a stone box with no heat, no running water, and a father-in-law who claimed to be penniless. "This cannot be happening," she muttered, backing away until she hit the cold wood of the front door. "This is a nightmare. You are lying. You are a lying old man. You are hiding it. You have accounts in the Caymans. You have gold bars buried in the cellar. I know you do." I spread my hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Feel free to look," I said. "But be careful in the cellar. The stairs are rotted, and there are rats the size of cats down there. Rats, she breathed. She looked at Jason, who was staring blankly at the wall as if his brain had short-circuited. Jason, do something, she hissed, grabbing his arm and digging her nails into his expensive parka. He is lying. Tell him he is lying. Jason looked at me. His eyes were searching mine, looking for a spark of the powerful tycoon he had known. But I gave him nothing. I gave him only the tired, defeated face of a man who had lost his gamble. Dad, he said, his voice weak. If you are broke, how are we going to live? We spent everything to get here. You thought I would support you, I finished for him. You thought you could move in and live like royalty on my dime. I walked back to my cot and sat down, the metal springs creaking loudly in the silence. Well, I said, gesturing to the vast, empty freezing room. You are welcome to stay. We can share the beans. And if we huddle together tonight, we might not freeze to death. But do not expect luxury. That life is over. For me. And apparently for you, too. Brittany looked at the camp stove. She looked at the single can of beans. She looked at the snow starting to pile up against the high windows, darkening the room further. The panic that had been building in her eyes finally exploded. No, she screamed. No, no, no. This isn't fair. I didn't sign up for this. I want to go home. I want a hotel. Call the driver back. Call him back right now. He is gone, Brittany, I said softly. And in this storm, he is not coming back. She slid down the door, burying her face in her hands, her screams turning into hysterical sobs that echoed uselessly in the cold, empty shell of my villa. She was finally seeing the house for what it was. It was not a palace. It was a mirror reflecting her own greed back at her, and it was ugly. Jason rushed to the massive oak door and threw it open. A gust of wind violently blew snow into the hall, coating the expensive leather bags in a layer of white powder. He ran out onto the porch, waving his arms frantically at the empty courtyard. The tire tracks from the van were already filling with snow. The red taillights were long gone, swallowed by the curve of the mountain road and the intensifying blizzard. He is gone, Jason yelled, his voice thin and panicked against the roar of the wind. He left us. That bastard left us. He fumbled with his smartphone, his fingers clumsy in the cold. I watched him tap the screen repeatedly, pacing in a small circle on the wet stone. No signal, he muttered, turning back to us with fear in his eyes. I have 0 bars. Brittany, my phone is dead. Try yours. Brittany did not move. She was standing by the pile of luggage, her chest heaving as she tried to compose herself. She pulled her phone from her pocket and stared at it. Nothing, she said. No service. We have to walk. Jason said, his voice rising in hysteria. We have to walk back down to the village. We cannot stay here. We will freeze. I took a sip of my coffee. It was ice cold now, but I drank it anyway. The village is 12 miles away, I said calmly. In this storm, you would make it maybe a mile before hypothermia set in. The roads are closed. The pass is blocked. You are not going anywhere. Jason looked at me, then at the dark, cavernous hall, then back at the whiteout outside. He looked like a trapped animal. He slammed the door shut, cutting off the wind, but sealing us in the gloom. This is insane, he hissed, turning on Brittany. You said he had a palace. You said we would be drinking champagne by a fire. Look at this place. It is a ruin. We are going to die here. Brittany ignored him. She was looking at me. I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. She was a survivor, I had to give her that. She was analyzing her options. Option A was to keep screaming and freeze to death. Option B was to leave and die in the snow. Option C was to stay here with a penniless old man and survive. She took a deep breath. She smoothed her hair. She adjusted her coat. And then right before my eyes, she transformed. The screeching harpy vanished. the terrified victim disappeared. In their place stood the loving, concerned daughter-in-law. It was a performance so sudden and so complete it was almost terrifying to watch. She walked over to me. She sidestepped a pile of rubble and a coil of wire. She reached out and took my hands. Her hands were shaking, but she forced a smile onto her face. "Dad," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming soft and trembling. "I am so sorry. Please forgive me." I panicked. It was just the shock. We were expecting something different, and I just lost my head for a moment. I looked at her hands holding mine. I did not pull away. I wanted to see how far she would take this. "It is a lot to take in," I said neutrally. "It is," she agreed, squeezing my fingers. "But you know what? It does not matter. The luxury, the furniture, the heat, none of that matters." She looked over at Jason, shooting him a warning glare that told him to shut up and play along. "Jason is right," she continued, turning her gaze back to me with wide, earnest eyes. "We came here because we heard you were alone. We heard you sold everything. We were worried about you, Conrad. We thought you might be lonely, and seeing you here living like this." She paused, biting her lip, as if holding back tears of sympathy. "It breaks my heart," she said. "You should not have to live in a construction site alone. You need family. You need us. And that is why we are staying." "You are staying?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Even though I have no money. Even though I have no heat." "Of course," Brittany said, and she actually managed to make it sound sincere. "We do not care about the money, Dad. How could you even think that? We love you. If you are broke, then we are broke together. We will help you fix this place up. Jason is strong. I can clean. We will make this a home. We will take care of you." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. 5 minutes ago, she was screaming for a hotel. Now she was Mother Teresa of the Alps. She was trying to rewrite reality, trying to make me believe that their presence was an act of charity rather than a parasitic invasion. "That is very generous of you," I said. "Considering you sold your condo, you have nowhere else to go, do you?" "That was just to be closer to you," she lied smoothly. "We wanted to commit to the move, to the family." I looked past her over her shoulder at the mountain of luggage they had dumped in the middle of the floor. My eyes scanned the expensive leather bags. There were stickers and tags fluttering in the draft. My gaze landed on a bright yellow tag attached to the handle of the largest suitcase. It was a standard airline baggage tag. I focused on the airport codes printed in bold black letters. JFK, Kennedy Airport, New York, to ZRH, Zurich, Switzerland. And then the date, yesterday. But it was the smaller print that caught my attention. The itinerary. It was not a round trip. There was no return date listed. It was a one-way ticket. One way. People who go on a visit buy round-trip tickets. People who go on a vacation have a return date. People who are running away, people who are fleeing a disaster they created buy one-way tickets because they know they cannot go back. They had not come to visit. They had not come to care for me. They had burned their bridges in New York and fled the country. They were refugees of their own making, and they had bet everything on me being their safety net. I looked back at Brittany. She was still smiling, that brave, self-sacrificing smile, waiting for me to melt, waiting for me to be the grateful, lonely old man. I decided to give her what she wanted, for now. "Well," I said, letting my shoulders sag as if in relief. "I must admit it has been hard. The nights are very long, and I am not as young as I used to be." Brittany's smile widened. She thought she had hooked me. "Exactly," she cooed. "We are here now. We will handle everything." "That is good," I said, "because I really do need help. The roof leaks in 3 places. The cellar needs to be cleared of debris, and the firewood needs to be chopped." "We can do that," Jason said, stepping forward, trying to redeem himself. though he looked at his soft, uncalloused hands with doubt. I can chop wood. Excellent, I said. I pulled my hands away from Brittany. If you are staying, I said, you will need to get settled. Night falls fast on the mountain, and once the sun goes down, the temperature inside will drop to 0. You need to be prepared. Where should we sleep? Brittany asked, looking toward the dark staircase that led to the upper floors. Is there a master suite that is habitable? The upstairs is off limits, I lied. The floorboards are rotten. It is not safe. I sleep down here. I pointed to the far corner of the hall, the darkest, draftiest corner opposite my own setup. The floor there was bare concrete covered in a fine layer of grit. You can set up camp over there, I said. It is out of the direct wind from the door. You have your coats. You have your clothes in those bags. Pile them up. Make a nest. It is the best way to keep warm. Body heat. Brittany looked at the dirty corner. She looked at her $10,000 worth of luggage. She looked at me. On the floor, she whispered. It is all we have, I said simply. Unless you want to sleep in the shed with the chemical toilet. But it smells quite bad in there. She swallowed hard. She looked at Jason. Jason looked defeated. He knew there was no arguing. The taxi was gone. The phone was dead. The door was locked. Okay, Brittany said, her voice tight. Okay. We will make it work. For you, Dad. For me, I repeated. Thank you, Brittany. That warms my heart. I watched them drag their heavy, useless bags across the rough floor. The wheels scraped and rattled. They reached the corner I had indicated. It was the spot furthest from the camping stove, furthest from the small amount of heat I generated. They began to unpack, not to hang up clothes in a closet, but to pile cashmere sweaters and silk dresses onto the dirty concrete to create a barrier against the cold. They were building a bed out of their vanity. I sat back down on my cot and pulled my blanket around my shoulders. I watched them. They were playing a role pretending to be the dutiful children. I was playing a role pretending to be the destitute father. But the difference was, I knew the game. They were just pawns, and as the wind howled outside, sealing us in for the night, I knew that the real lesson was just beginning. They wanted to live with me. They wanted to share my life. Well, they were about to get exactly what they asked for. Night fell over the Alps, not like a curtain, but like a hammer. The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, and within minutes, the temperature plummeted. Inside the villa, it was even worse. The stone walls, having absorbed the chill all day, began to radiate it inward. It was 15 degrees below 0 outside, but in the drafty hall, it felt like we were sleeping inside a meat locker. The wind picked up, screaming through the mortar gaps like a chorus of dying ghosts. I sat on my cot, wrapped in my thermal blanket, watching my guests. They were suffering. Real physical suffering. They had opened every suitcase. The floor was a sea of silk, cashmere, and denim. They were layering clothes on top of clothes. Brittany was wearing 3 sweaters, a pair of designer jeans, and her white fur coat. She looked like a marshmallow that had been rolled in a jewelry store. Jason had wrapped a dozen silk scarves around his neck and head, leaving only his eyes visible. They were shivering so hard, their teeth were chattering a sound that cut through the wind. I am hungry, Jason whined. His voice was muffled by the scarves. We haven't eaten since the plane. I pointed to the stack of cans next to my table. Help yourself, I said. Beans, high protein, good for the cold. Jason stumbled over to the table. He picked up a can. He looked at the manual can opener. He looked at it as if it were an alien artifact. He tried to attach it to the rim, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get a grip. He dropped the can. It rolled across the floor, clanging loudly. Useless, Brittany hissed. She grabbed the can opener. She struggled with it for 5 minutes, cursing under her breath, breaking a fingernail in the process. Finally, she managed to jaggedly tear the lid halfway off. She looked at the camping stove. "Light it," she ordered Jason. Jason looked at the propane tank. He turned the knob. Nothing happened. He turned it the other way. Nothing. He didn't know you had to strike a match while turning the gas. He didn't even have matches. "It is broken," he said, giving up immediately. I watched them from my cot. I had a lighter in my pocket. I could have shown them how to work it. I could have heated the beans for them. But I didn't. This was part of the education. If you want to survive, you have to learn how to feed yourself. They ate the beans cold. They used plastic spoons I had left on the table, scooping the gelatinous brown sludge directly from the jagged tin. Brittany gagged on the first bite. She looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes, but she swallowed. Hunger is a powerful motivator. It strips away dignity faster than anything else. When they finished, they crawled into the corner they had claimed. They piled the rest of their clothes on top of themselves, creating a nest of expensive fabric. It was a pathetic sight. Two people who thought they ruled the world, now huddling on a dirty concrete floor under a pile of fashion that couldn't protect them from the reality of winter. I lay back on my cot. I turned off my lantern, plunging the room into absolute darkness. "Good night," I said. "Try to sleep. Conserve your energy. You will need it tomorrow." Silence answered me. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing. I let my jaw relax. I let out a soft, rhythmic snore. I have always been a light sleeper, a habit from my days on construction sites where you had to listen for the sound of a cable snapping or a support giving way. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind and waiting. An hour passed. Then two. The cold was biting at my nose, but my thermal sleeping bag kept my core warm. Then I heard it. A rustling sound. The sound of synthetic fabric rubbing against stone. I cracked one eye open just a fraction. In the far corner, a faint blue light illuminated the darkness. It was the glow of a smartphone screen. Jason was huddled under a blanket, holding the phone close to his face. He was tapping the screen frantically. There was no signal. I knew that. The storm had knocked out the local tower hours ago, but he wasn't trying to call anyone. He was looking at something stored on the device. I focused my hearing, tuning out the wind, straining to catch the whispers that drifted across the hall. "Brittany," Jason whispered. His voice was trembling with fear, not cold. "Look at this." What Brittany mumbled from beneath a pile of coats. "Go to sleep." "I can't sleep," Jason hissed. "I keep looking at the file." "The timestamp." He shoved the phone toward her. The blue light illuminated her face as she looked at the screen. Her eyes went wide. "Put that away," she snapped, pushing his hand down. "You are wasting the battery. We can't charge it here. We need to know," Jason said, his voice rising in panic. "We need to know if they found the server, if they cracked the encryption." "Shut up," Brittany hissed. "He might hear you. He is asleep," she said, glancing toward my cot. "Listen to him. He is out cold." I let out another long, rattling snore to confirm her theory. Jason pulled the phone back to his face. He stared at it like it was a bomb. He whispered, and the desperation in his voice was chilling. "What if the FBI finds us? What if they track the flight manifest? We used our real passports." "They won't look here," Brittany whispered back, but her voice lacked conviction. "We are off the grid. This place doesn't even have an address. It is just coordinates on a map." "But the money," Jason said. "We don't have the money. We spent the last of the cash on the van. If we can't get access to his accounts, if we can't buy the new identities—" "We will get it," Brittany interrupted him. "We just need a few days. We have to break him. He is old. He is weak. We will scare him or we will trick him. But we are not leaving this mountain without his money." "But the FBI," Jason repeated. "If they get here before we get the cash—" "They won't," Brittany said firmly. "The storm is our friend. No one can get up here. Not the police, not the feds, we have time. Now put the phone away before you wake him up." The blue light vanished. The darkness returned, absolute and heavy. I lay there in the silence, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. So that was it. It wasn't just greed. It wasn't just a failed business venture or a desire to live rent-free. It was the FBI. My son and his wife were not just ungrateful children. They were fugitives. They were running from federal law enforcement. They had committed a crime serious enough to warrant flight, serious enough to make them fear the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And they had come to me not for sanctuary, but for financing. They needed my money to buy new identities. They needed my resources to disappear. I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the coldness of finality. Any lingering doubt, any small hope that this could be salvaged, was gone. They were criminals, and they had brought their crime to my doorstep. They had invaded my sanctuary, hoping to use me as an ATM for their escape. I thought about Jason's words. If they find us before we get the money. They were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. They had already proven they had no moral compass. Now I knew they had a deadline. They were on a clock. I shifted slightly under my blanket. The gun I kept in my emergency kit was under the cot within arm's reach. I didn't think I would need it tonight. They were too cold, too hungry, and too tired to try anything violent yet. They still thought they could manipulate me. They still thought I was the confused, broke old man. But tomorrow would be different. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark formulating a plan. They were trapped here by the snow, but I was trapped here with them. I had to be smart. I had to be careful, and I had to find out exactly what they had done. The wind howled outside, battering the stone walls of my fortress, but inside the real threat was sleeping under a pile of Louis Vuitton coats, dreaming of stealing the life I had built. They thought they were hiding. They thought they were safe. They didn't realize they had locked themselves in a cage with the zookeeper, and I was about to find out exactly what kind of animals I was dealing with. The first light of dawn filtered through the high, narrow windows of the villa, casting long gray shadows across the concrete floor. It was a bleak, colorless light that promised no warmth, only the beginning of another freezing day. I sat up on my cot, my joints protesting against the damp chill that had settled into the stone overnight. Across the room in the corner furthest from the draft, a pile of expensive fur, and down moved slightly. Jason and Brittany were huddled together like refugees beneath a mound of designer coats. They were alive, but they looked miserable. Their breath rose in small white puffs, appearing and disappearing in the rhythm of their fitful sleep. I pulled on my heavy boots, lacing them tight with fingers that felt stiff and clumsy. The act was a performance, even though they were barely awake. I needed to maintain the illusion of the struggling old man. I stood up and shuffled over to their corner, making sure my footsteps were heavy and dragging. "I am going to get wood," I announced, my voice rough with sleep. "The fire is dead. We need fuel or we will freeze before noon." A grunt came from beneath the pile of coats. It was Jason. He did not emerge. He just burrowed deeper, seeking the warmth of his wife's body. Brittany did not move at all. She was likely pretending to be asleep, unwilling to face the reality of the morning. I walked to the heavy front door and unbolted it. The metal was so cold it burned my skin. I pulled it open, and a gust of wind threw a handful of snow into my face. I stepped out into the storm, pulling the door shut behind me. The wind on the mountain was ferocious. It screamed around the corners of the villa, whipping the snow into blinding vortices. Visibility was less than 10 feet. I lowered my head and trudged through the drifts, my path leading away from the front gate and toward the back of the property. There, standing in the shadow of a granite overhang, was a structure that looked like it was about to collapse. It was an old wooden shed, its timber blackened by rot and weather. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and the door hung crookedly on rusted hinges. It looked like a place where you would store broken tools or perhaps garbage. Brittany had looked at it yesterday with a curled lip and declared it a health hazard. She would not step foot in there if her life depended on it, which made it the perfect place for my sanctuary. I reached the shed and glanced back at the villa. The windows were dark. No one was watching. I stepped onto the rotting porch and gripped the handle of the crooked door. I lifted it slightly to relieve the weight on the hinges and pushed. It swung open silently. I stepped inside into a small anteroom that smelled of sawdust and old oil. It was filled with stacks of rough-hewn firewood piled high to the ceiling. This was the camouflage. To anyone glancing inside, it was exactly what it appeared to be: a woodshed. But I did not stop there. I walked to the back wall where a heavy workbench stood covered in rusty tools. I reached under the bench and pressed a knot in the wood of the wall. A panel slid open, revealing a keypad with a biometric scanner. I placed my thumb on the glass. A soft green light scanned my print. There was a mechanical click and a section of the back wall pushing inward and sliding aside on silent pneumatic rails. I stepped through the opening, and the environment changed instantly. The air here was warm, dry, and filtered. The floor was not rotting wood, but sleek, anti-static composite. The walls were lined with soundproofing panels. Soft LED lighting illuminated a bank of servers humming quietly in a rack against the far wall. In the center of the room sat a large desk with 3 curved monitors and a high-end ergonomic chair. This was my command center. It was powered by a geothermal generator buried deep beneath the foundation and connected to the world by a Starlink satellite dish hidden in the false chimney on the roof. I closed the hidden door behind me, sealing myself in the warmth. I took a deep breath, letting the clean, heated air fill my lungs. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the tension of the frail old man act drain out of my shoulders. Here I was, not Conrad the broke retiree. I was Conrad the architect of my own destiny. I walked to the desk and tapped the keyboard. The screens flared to life. The satellite connection was strong despite the storm. I opened a secure video conferencing app and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Then the face of Arthur Stone appeared on the center screen. He was sitting in his office in Manhattan, the city lights blurring in the background. He looked tired. It was late in New York, but Stone never slept. "Conrad," he said, his voice crisp and clear through the high-definition speakers. "I did not expect to hear from you so soon. The weather reports say you are buried under 10 feet of snow. Are you all right?" "I am fine, Stone," I said, sitting down in the chair. "But my solitude has been interrupted." He frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Interrupted? By whom? Did the press find you?" "Worse," I said. "My family." Stone's eyebrows shot up. "Jason and Brittany. They are there. In the Alps." "They arrived yesterday," I said. "In a rented van with 10 suitcases and one-way tickets. They think I am broke, Stone. I fed them the story about the bad investment and the frozen accounts. They bought it. But there is something else." I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice dropping low. "They are running Stone. I heard them talking last night. Jason is terrified. He was checking a file on his phone obsessively, even though there is no signal in the main house. They mentioned the FBI. They mentioned encryption keys. And they are desperate for cash. Not just greed desperate. Fear desperate." Stone's face hardened. The lawyer in him took over immediately. He began typing on his own keyboard, his eyes scanning data I could not see. "The FBI," he repeated. "That changes things. This is not just a domestic dispute anymore. If they are fugitives and they are in your house, you could be implicated for harboring them." "That is why I am calling," I said. "I need you to dig Stone. Dig deep. I want to know exactly why my son fled the country. Check the federal dockets, check the SEC filings, check the crypto exchanges. If he stole money, I want to know whose money it is. If he scammed people, I want the names. I will put the investigative team on it immediately, Stone said. It is 3 a.m. here, but I will wake them up. We will have a preliminary report within hours. Good, I said. And Stone, be discreet. If there is an active warrant, I do not want the Swiss authorities kicking down my door just yet. I need to handle this my way first. I need to make sure I am in the clear before the hammer drops. Understood, Stone said. I will tread lightly. But Conrad, be careful. If Jason is desperate enough to run from the feds, he is desperate enough to do anything. Do not underestimate what a cornered animal will do. I looked at the image of my old friend. I know, I said. That is why I am freezing them out. Hunger and cold make people sloppy. They will make a mistake. And when they do, I will be ready. I ended the call. The screen went black. I sat there for a moment longer, reluctant to leave the warmth and the sanity of my bunker. But I had been gone too long. If I stayed away much longer, they might get suspicious. Or worse, they might come looking. I stood up and walked back to the hidden door. I initiated the lockdown sequence, putting the servers into sleep mode and dimming the lights. I stepped back into the freezing anteroom and watched the wall slide shut, becoming just dirty wood once again. I grabbed an armful of the pre-cut firewood from the stack. It was heavy, rough birch that would burn slow and hot. I hoisted it against my chest, feeling the bark bite into my coat. I walked back out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked me over, but I lowered my head and pushed through. I reached the front door of the villa and kicked it with my boot to knock off the snow. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The hall was still freezing, but there was movement now. Brittany was awake. She was standing near my cot, her back to me. She was bent over, digging through the canvas duffel bag I kept under the bed. It was an old ragged bag, where I kept my spare wool socks and long underwear. She was frantic, throwing my clothes onto the floor, her hands searching deep into the pockets of my spare trousers. I kicked the door shut with my heel. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. Brittany jumped. She spun around, a pair of my gray wool socks in her hand. Her face was flushed, not from cold, but from the shame of being caught. I walked toward her, slowly dropping the firewood onto the hearth with a loud crash. Dust and bark chips flew into the air. I wiped the snow from my eyebrows and looked at her. I kept my face blank, devoid of accusation, just the confused old man returning from his chores. "Good morning, Brittany," I said, my voice mild. She stared at me, clutching the socks against her chest. She couldn't speak. She looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. I pointed a gloved finger at the socks in her hand. "Are you looking for socks?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. She stammered, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I... You should have asked," I continued, shuffling past her to the stove. "Those are my spares. They have holes in the heels, I am afraid. The moths got to them last summer. But if your feet are cold, you are welcome to them." I picked up the kettle and shook it. Empty. Brittany looked down at the rough gray wool in her hands. She wasn't looking for socks. She was looking for a wallet. She was looking for a passport. She was looking for a bank book. She was looking or anything that would prove I was lying. But all she found were holy socks. She threw them back onto the cot as if they were infected. "No," she snapped, her voice shrill with frustration. "I don't want your dirty socks. I was looking for a match. To light the stove. Jason is freezing." "Ah," I said, nodding slowly. "Matches?" "Of course." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a box of waterproof matches. I tossed them to her. She fumbled and caught them. "Here," I said. "Get a fire going." I brought the wood. She glared at me, her eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and humiliation. She knew that I knew. But she couldn't say it. She couldn't admit she was robbing me, because that would break the charade. She had to swallow her rage. "Thank you," she spit out the words like poison. She turned and marched back to her corner, waking Jason with a sharp kick to the ribs. I watched her go. I turned back to the kettle, filling it with snow I had brought in from the porch. "Go ahead, Brittany," I thought. "Search the bags. Search the floor. Search the walls. You won't find what you are looking for. Because the man you are looking for is hidden behind a wall in the woodshed, and he is watching every move you make." I sat back on the edge of my cot, pulling the scratchy wool blanket up to my chin. The fire Brittany had managed to start was pathetic, a small smoky pile of birch twigs that produced more coughing than heat. She and Jason were huddled as close to the flames as they dared, their designer coats smudged with soot. They looked less like the masters of the universe they claimed to be, and more like shipwreck survivors washing up on a hostile shore. My left wrist buzzed against my skin. It was a series of short, sharp vibrations that I felt in my bones. It was the signal I had been waiting for. I glanced over at them. They were arguing in hushed tones, their heads bowed over a piece of stale baguette I had left on the table. They were too distracted by their own misery to notice me. I pulled my sleeve back just an inch. The face of my smartwatch glowed with a faint amber light. It was in stealth mode, designed not to draw attention in a dark room. I tapped the screen, and the encrypted message from Stone began to scroll across the small glass surface. I read the words, and with every line, the picture became clearer and darker. The report was comprehensive. Stone's team had worked fast. The subject line read simply, "Priority 1, Federal Indictment Unsealed." I kept my face impassive, masking the shock that hit me like a physical blow. It was not just debt. It was not just bad business. It was a catastrophe. Jason and Brittany had founded a company called Apex Horizon. It was pitched as a revolutionary decentralized exchange, a platform that would democratize wealth for the common man. But according to the SEC filing Stone had summarized, it was nothing of the sort. It was a classic Ponzi scheme dressed up in the modern vocabulary of cryptocurrency. They had promised investors guaranteed returns of 20% a month. They had hired influencers to pump the coin. They had thrown lavish parties in Miami and Dubai. And the money flowed in. $5 million in less than 6 months. Teachers, retirees, college kids hoping to pay off loans. They had taken it all, and they had spent it. The report detailed the expenditures: luxury cars, private jets, the very clothes on their backs. They had burned through the capital, living a lie while the back end of their system was empty. There was no trading algorithm. There was no liquidity pool. There was just a bank account that Jason controlled and drained daily. But the house of cards had collapsed 3 days ago. A whistleblower from their tech team had gone to the authorities. The SEC had moved in fast, freezing every known asset associated with Apex Horizon. Bank accounts in New York, London, and Singapore were locked down. Then came the kicker. The text on my watch scrolled to the legal status. Status fugitive. Red notice requested. Interpol. My son was not just a white-collar criminal. He was an international fugitive. A red notice meant that law enforcement agencies worldwide were on the lookout for them, with orders to arrest on-site and extradite. I let my sleeve slide back down, covering the watch. I stared at the ceiling where the cobwebs danced in the draft. They were broke, completely and utterly broke. Their credit cards were useless pieces of plastic. Their bank apps would show zero. They had no access to funds anywhere in the world. That explained the desperation. That explained the one-way ticket. They had fled New York hours before the FBI kicked down the door of their penthouse. They had run to the airport, buying the first flight to Zurich, likely using the last heavy stack of cash they had in a wall safe. And then they came here. It all made sense now. The urgency, the anger, the way Brittany had looked at the empty villa with such horror. They did not come here to live off me. They came here to liquidate me. Zurich is known for many things, banking chocolate and watches. But in certain circles it is also known as a hub for the black market trade in high-quality forged identities, passports, visas, new names, new lives. But those things cost money, serious money. You cannot buy a clean passport with a frozen credit card. You need cash. You need diamonds. You need gold. They thought I was sitting on a dragon's hoard. They thought Conrad Sterling, the retired tycoon, had millions tucked away in this mountain fortress. They planned to take it, drive to Zurich, buy their new lives, and disappear into a non-extradition country in South America or Southeast Asia. I looked across the room at them. Jason broke off a piece of the hard bread. His hands were black with soot. He chewed slowly, his eyes staring into the dying fire with a 1,000-yard stare. He looked haunted. He looked like a man who woke up every morning hoping it was all a dream, only to realize the nightmare was real. Brittany sat beside him. She was not eating. She was watching the flames, her jaw set tight. She looked predatory. She was calculating. I could almost hear her thoughts whirring in the silence. She was wondering how much time they had. She was wondering if the Swiss police were already scanning the passenger manifests. She was wondering how to get the money out of the old man before the net closed. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the absence of heartbreak. I expected to feel sorrow for my son. I expected to want to save him. But the report on my wrist had cauterized those feelings. He had stolen from innocent people. He had ruined lives. And now he was willing to ruin mine to save his own skin. There was no innocent boy left in that man. There was only a desperate criminal. And desperate criminals are dangerous. I shifted on the cot, the springs creaking loudly. Brittany's head snapped toward me instantly, her eyes sharp and alert. She was watching me like a hawk watches a field mouse. I coughed a dry, rattling sound and turned over facing the wall. I needed to think. I needed a strategy. I could not kick them out. If I forced them out into the storm, they might die, and despite everything, I did not want their blood on my hands. Or worse, they might panic and attack me. There were 2 of them and 1 of me. I was 72. Jason was 38. If it came to a physical fight, I would lose. I could not let them leave either. If they somehow made it down the mountain and disappeared, I would be an accessory. I would be the father who let the fugitives escape. I had to keep them here. I had to be the jailer. The storm was my ally. The snow was blocking the pass, keeping the world out, and keeping them in. But the storm would pass. Stone said he had notified the authorities, but bureaucracies move slowly, especially across international borders. It might take days for the extradition paperwork to clear. It might take days for the Swiss police to mobilize a tactical team for a mountain raid. I had to stall them. I had to play the part of the confused, broke old man perfectly. I had to dangle a carrot in front of them, something shiny enough to keep them mesmerized, something valuable enough to make them stay and wait. I had to invent a treasure. I listened to the wind howling outside, battering the stone walls. It was a fortress indeed, but it was no longer protecting me from the outside world. It was trapping me inside with the wolves. I looked at Jason again. He was shivering violently now, the fire dying down to embers. He reached out and put his arm around Brittany, seeking comfort. She stiffened and pushed him away, a sharp rejection that spoke volumes. The money was gone, and so was the love. They were alone in the world. And they were about to find out that the only thing colder than the Swiss winter is the justice that waits at the end of a long fall. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep, but my mind was racing. I knew what I had to do. I had to become the thing they wanted me to be. I had to become the victim. Because the moment they realized I was the hunter, I would be dead. The wind battered the villa with renewed fury, rattling the loose panes of glass in the high windows. Inside, the atmosphere was even more volatile. We had been trapped together for 36 hours. The hunger was gnawing at our bellies, and the cold was a constant physical assault. But while I sat quietly conserving my energy, Brittany was pacing. She moved back and forth across the concrete floor, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm that echoed in the emptiness. She looked like a caged tiger, hungry and looking for something to kill. Suddenly she stopped. She turned toward me, and the look in her eyes was chilling. It was the look of someone who had run out of time and patience. She marched over to my cot and kicked the metal leg hard. The vibration jarred me, but I kept my posture hunched and defensive. "Get up," she hissed. "Get up, old man. We are done playing games." I looked up at her, blinking slowly. "Brittany, what is it?" "Don't play dumb with me," she spat. "We know you are holding out. Jason and I have been talking. Nobody sells a business empire for $20 million and ends up with nothing but a can of beans and a sleeping bag. You hid it, you buried it, and you are going to tell us where it is right now." I shook my head, letting my hands tremble visibly. "I told you. I spent it all. The restoration costs." "Liar," she screamed, cutting me off. Her voice cracked with desperation. "You are a liar. And you know what? We don't care anymore. If you won't give us the money, we will take the house." "You can't sell the house," I whispered. "It is unfinished. No one will buy it." "Oh, we won't sell it," she said, leaning down until her face was inches from mine. "We will sign it over to a holding company, and then we are going to put you where you belong." She straightened up and looked at Jason, who was standing by the fire, rubbing his hands nervously. "Tell him, Jason. Tell him the plan." Jason looked at the floor, then at me. He looked ashamed, but the fear in his eyes was stronger than the shame. "We found a place, Dad," he mumbled. "Online, before the battery died. It is in Italy, just across the border. A nursing home." Brittany interrupted, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "But not a nice one. It is a state facility for the indigent, for people with no families and no money. They call it Il Tramonto, the sunset." She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "They say the ratio of staff to patients is 1:50, she continued. "They say they tie the residents to their beds at night so they don't wander. They say the food is mostly gruel. That is where you are going, Conrad. We are going to drive you there, drop you at the front gate with a note pinned to your coat saying you have dementia, and we are going to leave you there to rot." I felt a genuine chill run down my spine. Not because I believed she could do it, but because I saw the absolute malice in her soul. She was willing to discard a human life like a piece of trash. Unless, she added, her voice dropping to a whisper, "unless you remember where the money is. If you give us the cash, we will leave you here. You can freeze in your own house, but at least you will be free." I looked at Jason. He didn't say a word. He didn't step in to defend his father. He just watched, waiting to see if the threat worked. It was time. I had to give them the bait. I let out a long, shuddering breath. I covered my face with my hands, rocking back and forth. "No," I whimpered. "Not the home. Please, not the home. Martha made me promise never to go to a home." "Then talk," Brittany commanded. "Where is it?" I don't have cash," I stammered, peering at them through my fingers. "Not here. Not in the house, but..." Where then Jason stepped forward, his interest piqued. "Zurich," I whispered. The word hung in the air like a magic spell. Zurich, the city of banks, the city of secrets. "Zurich," Jason repeated. "What is in Zurich, Dad?" I lowered my hands, looking up at them with tear-filled eyes. I kept a safety deposit box at the Bahnhofstrasse vault. Private storage. Non-bank. What is in the box? Brittany demanded, grabbing my shoulder and shaking me. Papers, bonds. What gold? I said softly. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop to listen. Gold, she breathed. How much gold, Conrad? I closed my eyes, pretending to struggle with the memory. I bought it. Right before the move, I said. As insurance, just in case the currency collapsed. I put it in the box. 50 bars. 50 bars, Jason choked out. 50 kilo bars, yes, I said. 50 kilos. I heard the sharp intake of breath from both of them. I could almost hear the calculators clicking in their brains. Gold was trading high. 50 kilos was worth over $3 million. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was enough to buy the best passports on the black market. It was enough to charter a private jet to a non-extradition country. It was enough to disappear forever. $3 million, Brittany whispered. Her eyes were wide, glowing with a mixture of greed and relief. It is there right now. You have the key. I nodded, tapping the chest pocket of my inner vest. I keep the key. Close to my heart, I said. And the access code. It is Martha's birthday. Jason let out a whoop of joy. He grabbed Brittany and hugged her, spinning her around. We are saved, he yelled. We are saved, Em. We can go right now. He turned to me, his face flushed with excitement. Give it to us, Dad. Give us the key. I shrank back, clutching my chest. But you said you would leave me, I whined. If I give you the key, you have to promise not to put me in the home. Yeah, whatever, Jason said, waving his hand dismissively. We don't care about the home. We just want the key. Give it to me. He reached for me, but Brittany stopped him. She was smarter. She was colder. Wait, she said. We need him. What? Jason asked. Why? We have the key. We have the code. It is a private vault, Jason, she said. They have biometrics. They need a fingerprint or a retinal scan. We can't just walk in there with a key. We need him to open it. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. You have to come with us, she said. You are going to open that box for us. I nodded weakly. Okay. Anything. Just don't put me in the home. Let's go, Jason said, grabbing his coat. Pack the bags. No, wait, screw the bags. We just need the key and the old man. Let's get to the van. He ran to the door and threw it open, ready to sprint to freedom. But he stopped. He stood in the doorway, staring out into the white void. The wind howled, blowing snow into the room, coating the floor in seconds. Where is the van? He yelled, looking back at us. I stayed seated on the cot. I pulled my blanket tighter. The van is gone, son, I said quietly. Remember the driver left yesterday? Right, Jason said, pacing frantically. But we can walk. It is downhill, or we can call a car. I shook my head slowly. Look outside, Jason, I said, pointing a trembling finger toward the window. Look at the snow. He looked. The snow was piled 5 feet high against the glass. The world outside was a swirling vortex of white violence. You couldn't see the trees. You couldn't see the road. You couldn't see anything. The pass is closed, and I said, my voice filled with the resignation of a local who knows the mountain. When a storm like this hits, they close the Simplon Pass. The plows won't run. The avalanche risk is too high. But we have to go. Jason screamed. We have to get to Zurich. You can't, I said. Even if you had a car, you would slide off the cliff in 10 minutes. The road is ice. Pure ice. What about your snowmobile? Brittany asked, whirling on me. You said you had a snowmobile. In the shed. I did, I lied. It is an old Yamaha. But The engine block cracked last week. I was waiting for parts. It won't start. I tried yesterday. Brittany screamed in frustration. She picked up a piece of rubble and threw it against the wall. It shattered into dust. "So we are stuck," she yelled. "We are sitting on $3 million and we are stuck in this freezer." I nodded. "For now," I said. "The forecast. The radio said the storm will break in 3 days. Then the plows will come. Then the road will open." 3 days. Jason moaned, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "We don't have 3 days. What if they find us? They won't find you in this," I said. "No one is coming up this mountain, Jason. Not in this weather. You are safe here. As long as the storm lasts, you are safe." Brittany looked at Jason, then at me. She walked over to the window and stared out at the white wall of snow. She placed her hand against the glass, feeling the deadly cold on the other side. 3 days, she whispered. She turned back to me. The malice was gone, replaced by a cold, pragmatic calculation. She needed me alive. She needed me healthy enough to travel to Zurich. She needed my hand to open the vault. "Fine," she said. 3 days. She walked over to the cot and adjusted my blanket, tucking it in around my feet. It was a gesture that looked like care but felt like a prison guard checking the shackles. "You better stay healthy, Conrad," she said softly. "You better not die on us. Because if you die, that gold stays locked in the dark forever. And we can't have that." I looked up at her, feigning gratitude. "Thank you, Brittany," I whispered. "Thank you for not sending me to the home." "Don't thank me yet," she said, walking back to Jason. I watched them huddle together, whispering, making plans for how they would spend my gold. They were trapped. They were greedy. And they were waiting. But they didn't know that I was waiting too. I wasn't waiting for the plows. I was waiting for the FBI. And every hour the storm raged was another hour the net tightened around them. The gold was a lie. The snowmobile was fine. But the trap was very, very real. The second day of the blizzard brought a silence that was heavier than the snow piling up against the windows. The wind had died down to a low moan, but the temperature had dropped even further. Inside the villa, the air was crystalline. If you breathed out too quickly, the moisture in your lungs turned to ice fog right in front of your face. We were running out of propane for the small camping stove. The flame was sputtering, a weak blue tongue that offered no heat, only a cruel reminder of what warmth used to feel like. The hunger was the first thing to change us. We had finished the last can of beans that morning. I had offered to share my secret stash of dried crackers, but Brittany had thrown them across the room in a fit of rage, screaming that she wasn't a rat, and she wouldn't eat rat food. Now the hunger was a dull ache in the center of our bodies, a constant gnawing emptiness that stripped away the veneer of civilization. I lay on my cot, wrapped in my gray wool blanket. It was old and scratchy, but it was thick. It was the only barrier between me and the concrete floor that felt like a block of ice. I was conserving my energy, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. I watched them from beneath the folds of the wool. Jason and Brittany were pacing. They couldn't sit still. The cold wouldn't let them. They moved like caged animals, their expensive leather boots scuffing against the debris. They had put on every piece of clothing they owned, but fashion is not designed for survival. Silk offers no insulation. Cashmere is useless when it gets damp. And they were damp from the condensation of their own breath and the melted snow they had tracked in. Brittany stopped pacing. She stood in the center of the room, shivering violently. Her lips were a pale shade of blue. She looked at Jason, who was rubbing his arms, trying to generate friction. Then she turned her head slowly and looked at me. I saw the thought form in her mind. It was a primal thought. It was the logic of the lifeboat. He has something I need. He is weak, I am strong. She walked toward me. Her steps were purposeful. The click of her heels was gone, replaced by the heavy thud of determination. She stopped at the foot of my cot. I looked up at her, blinking slowly, playing the part of the exhausted old man. "Brittany," I croaked. Is it time for the plows?" She didn't answer. She reached down and grabbed the edge of my blanket. "Get up," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I gripped the wool tighter. "What? Why?" "Give me the blanket," she said louder this time. I stared at her. "But it is my only blanket, Brittany. I am freezing. My joints—" "I don't care about your joints," she snapped. "Look at me, Conrad. I am turning blue. I am a woman. I have less body mass. I need it more than you do." She yanked on the fabric. I held on, feigning a struggle, but letting my grip be weak enough for her to overpower. "Please," I whispered. "You have your furs. You have Jason to hold you." "My furs are useless," she spat, giving another violent tug. "And Jason is freezing too. You are old. You have lived your life. Your skin is like leather anyway. You are tough. You can take it." She pulled hard. The blanket slid off my legs, exposing me to the biting air. The cold hit me instantly, like a bucket of ice water. I curled into a ball, trying to preserve my core heat. Brittany wrapped the blanket around herself immediately, sighing as the wool trapped her body heat. She looked like a conqueror wearing the spoils of war. "Jason," I called out. My voice was trembling, and this time I didn't have to act. The cold was real. "Jason," she took my blanket. "Help me, son. Please. I will die without it." I looked at my son, my flesh and blood. The boy I had carried on my shoulders at the zoo. The boy I had taught to fish. The man I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count. Jason stood by the dead fireplace. He looked at Brittany wrapped in my wool cocoon. He looked at me shivering on the cot, in my thin shirt and trousers. He hesitated. For a second I saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes. I saw the ghost of the boy who used to cry when he saw a hurt bird. I waited for him to step forward. I waited for him to say, "Brittany, give it back, that is my father." But the flicker died. It was extinguished by the cold and the fear and the lifetime of weakness that I had enabled. He looked away. He couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the wall where the frost was creating intricate patterns on the brick. "She is right." "Dad," he mumbled. His voice was low, ashamed, but resolute. "She is really cold. You know how she gets. Her circulation is bad." "Jason," I whispered. "I am 72. Hypothermia." "You will be fine," he interrupted me, his voice rising slightly as he tried to convince himself. "You are tough, Dad. You always said you were tough. Just move around. Do some jumping jacks or something. Keep your blood flowing. You will be okay." He walked over to Brittany, and she opened the blanket, sharing the stolen warmth with him. They huddled together, a two-headed monster of selfishness, turning their backs on me. I lay there on the exposed cot. The cold was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. My fingers started to numb almost instantly. My teeth chattered a rhythmic clacking sound that echoed in the silent room. But strangely, the physical pain was distant. It was overshadowed by a much profounder sensation. It was the feeling of a cord being cut. For years I had made excuses for him. I told myself he was just influenced by the wrong people. I told myself he was just trying to find his way. I told myself that deep down beneath the entitlement and the laziness there was a good heart. But there wasn't. There was nothing there. Just a void where a soul should be. He had just sentenced me to death. He didn't pull a trigger. He didn't wield a knife, but he had stripped me of my protection in sub-zero temperatures and told me to do jumping jacks. He was willing to watch me freeze to death to keep his wife warm. The last thread of fatherly love, the last instinct to protect him, snapped. It broke cleanly like a frozen branch. I stopped shivering, not because I was warm, but because a cold rage had settled in my center, a heatless fire that burned brighter than any flame. I looked at their backs. They were whispering again, probably planning their trip to Zurich, probably spending the millions they thought I had. They didn't know it, but they were alone in that room. The father they knew was gone. He had died the moment Jason turned his head away. The man lying on the cot was not their father. I was their judge, and the verdict had just been delivered. I curled my knees to my chest, pulling my arms inside my shirt. I would survive this. I had survived worse on job sites in the dead of winter. I knew how to breathe, how to minimize surface area, how to drift into a light trance to lower my metabolic rate. I would survive. But Jason would not. Not the Jason who was my heir. Not the Jason who was in my will. That Jason was dead, buried under the weight of his own cowardice. I watched the steam rise from their huddle. They thought they had won a small victory. They thought they had secured their comfort. They had no idea what they had just cost themselves. They had traded an empire for a wool blanket. And as the darkness of the second night swallowed the room, I closed my eyes and let the cold harden my resolve into diamond. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, the game ends. The third day rose over the mountain like a gray bruise. The light was weak, filtering through the snow-packed windows with a dull, listless quality that signaled the end of hope. Inside the villa, the silence of the previous night had been replaced by a frenetic, manic energy. Brittany was no longer pacing. She was sitting at the plastic table, scribbling furiously on a piece of paper she had torn from a leather-bound notebook found in one of her boxes. Her hand moved with jerky, violent strokes, the pen digging deep into the paper. I watched her from my cot. My body was stiff, the cold having settled deep into my marrow after a night without a blanket. I was shivering not just from the temperature, but from the lack of calories. We were starving. The hunger had moved past the pain stage and into a strange, light-headed delirium. But Brittany seemed fueled by something else entirely. She was fueled by the pure, concentrated panic of a rat that smells the trap closing. Jason was standing by the door. He was preparing to leave. He had wrapped his expensive Italian leather boots in plastic shopping bags using duct tape from my toolkit to secure them. He was wearing 4 layers of pants and 3 coats. He looked like a bloated, terrified child playing explorer. He was getting ready to walk to Zurich. It was a suicide mission. The snow was waist-deep and the nearest town was 12 miles away. He would be dead in an hour. But he was more afraid of the FBI than he was of the cold. "Done," Brittany announced loudly, slamming the pen down. She stood up. In her left hand she held the piece of paper. In her right hand she held the bread knife. It was the only utensil. We had a long serrated blade we had used to saw through the tin cans of beans. It wasn't sharp enough to shave with, but it was jagged enough to tear flesh wide open. She walked toward me. Her eyes were rimmed with red, dark circles hanging heavy under them. Her hair was matted. She looked deranged. "Sit up," she commanded. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my joints cracking audibly. "Brittany, what is that?" "It is your salvation, old man," she said, waving the paper. "And ours. Since you can't go to Zurich, and Jason has to go alone, we need this. It is an asset release form." I squinted at the paper. It was handwritten in block letters. "I, Conrad Sterling, hereby authorize my son Jason Sterling to access safety deposit box 404 at the Zurich private vault. I grant him full power of attorney over the contents, including all gold bullion and bearer bonds." It was crude. It was legally laughable. No Swiss banker worth his salt would accept a handwritten note from a shivering man in plastic-wrapped boots. But Brittany wasn't thinking about Swiss banking regulations. She was thinking about survival. "You want me to sign that?" I asked, my voice raspy. Yes, she said, stepping closer. Sign it and date it. Jason leaves in 10 minutes. I looked at Jason. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was adjusting his scarf, staring at the floor. Jason, I said, you can't walk to Zurich. The snow... Shut up, Brittany screamed. She lunged forward and pressed the cold, serrated blade of the knife against the loose skin of my neck. I froze. I could feel the individual teeth of the blade. She wasn't bluffing. The desperation had snapped something inside her. The veneer of civilization was completely gone. Sign the paper, Conrad, she hissed, leaning close. Her breath smelled of ketones and sour fear. Sign it, or I swear to God I will carve you up right here. I will leave you bleeding on this concrete, and by the time you die, Jason will be halfway down the mountain. Okay, I whispered, lifting my hands in surrender. Okay, don't hurt me. I will sign. She pulled the knife back an inch but kept it leveled at my throat. She slapped the paper onto the blanket covering my legs and thrust the pen at me. Do it. Now. I took the pen. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint. My hands were trembling violently. This time I didn't have to act. The adrenaline and the cold were doing the work for me. But I amplified it. I let my hand shake so hard the pen tapped a staccato rhythm against the paper. I can't hold it steady, I stammered. My fingers, they are numb, Brittany. I can't feel them. Right, she shrieked, poking me with the knife tip. I touched the pen to the paper. I started to write. C-O. The lines were jagged, unreadable scrawls. I let the pen slide across the page, ruining the first line of text. Oh no, I whimpered. I messed it up. It smeared. Brittany looked at the page. It was a mess. Idiot, she growled. Do it again. Below the line. And make it legible. If the banker can't read it, it is useless. I tried again. I gripped the pen like a toddler making a fist around the barrel. I pressed down hard. Too hard. Crack. The plastic tip of the pen snapped under the pressure. The ballpoint flew off and ink bled onto the blanket in a dark blue stain. I dropped the broken shaft. It broke, I whispered, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes. The pen broke. Brittany screamed a sound of pure, primal rage. She raised the knife as if to strike. Jason flinched by the door. Don't, Jason yelled instinctively. We need him alive, Em. We need the signature. Brittany lowered her hand, breathing heavily. She looked at the broken pen. She looked at me. Find another pen, she barked at Jason without turning around. Check his bag. Check the table. Find a pen. Jason started scrambling around the room, overturning the empty bean cans, searching through my rucksack. While he searched, I grabbed my throat, coughing dryly. Water, I wheezed. I need water, Brittany. My throat is closing up. I can't focus. I am dizzy. If I pass out, I can't sign. She looked at me with disgust. You are stalling. I am dying, I countered, leaning back against the wall, letting my eyes roll back slightly. Please. Warm water. Just a sip. Then I will sign. I promise. She hesitated. She looked at the knife, then at Jason, who was frantically digging through his own luggage, now looking for a pen. Fine, she spat. She walked over to the stove. The propane was gone, but there was a cup of snow melt that was slightly less freezing than the air. She grabbed it and marched back. She held the cup to my lips, roughly spilling half of it down my chin. The water was icy, but it felt good. I drank slowly, forcing her to wait, forcing her to stand there serving me while her anxiety spiked redline. Hurry up, she snapped, pulling the cup away. Jason, did you find a pen I gotten? Jason yelled, holding up a gold-plated fountain pen he had found in his briefcase. Use this one. He ran over and handed it to Brittany. She uncapped it. It was a beautiful instrument worth more than the car I drove in college. Here, she said, shoving it into my hand. Be careful. If you break this one, I will use the knife to write the signature in your blood. Do you understand me? I nodded. I took the heavy, expensive pen. I adjusted the paper, finding a clean corner. I poised the nib over the paper. I took a deep breath. I had stalled for 10 minutes. I had played the invalid. I had played the fool. I looked at the tip of the pen. I looked at Brittany's white-knuckled grip on the knife. I muttered, lowering the pen. I need to warm my hand. Just for a second. Sign it, she screamed, raising the knife again. I braced myself. I was out of tricks. I was going to have to make a move or take a cut. And then I heard it. It started as a low, thrumming vibration in the floorboards. A sound felt before it was heard. It grew steadily, a rhythmic beating that cut through the whistle of the wind. Thwop, 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 thwop. Brittany froze. The knife wavered in her hand. What is that? She whispered. Jason ran to the window, wiping the frost from the glass. It is getting louder, he said, his voice rising in hope. It sounds like an engine. The sound grew to a roar. It was not a car. It was not a plow. It was coming from above. The heavy, distinct chop of rotor blades beating against the thin mountain air. It is a helicopter, Jason yelled, spinning around, his face lit up with a wild, desperate joy. It is a helicopter. Dad was right, the storm broke. It is the rescue team. He started jumping up and down, laughing hysterically. We are saved. We are saved. We can take the chopper to Zurich. We don't need to walk. Brittany lowered the knife. She looked at the ceiling as the sound became deafening, vibrating the dust loose from the bricks. A slow smile spread across her face. A helicopter, she said. Perfect. She looked down at me, the arrogance returning to her eyes instantly. Get up, Conrad, she said. Your ride is here. You are coming with us. We are taking that gold today. I sat up slowly, brushing the pen aside. I listened to the roar of the machine hovering over my courtyard. I knew that sound. It was a twin-engine heavy-lift chopper, the kind used by law enforcement for high-altitude extraction. I looked at Brittany. I looked at the knife she was now casually holding by her side. You are right, Brittany. I said, my voice steady and strong, the tremor completely gone. The ride is here. But I don't think it is going to Zurich. The roar of the rotor blades was deafening, a physical weight that pressed down on the roof of the villa and shook the dust from the ancient mortar joints. The sound was so loud, it vibrated in my teeth and rattled the bones in my chest. Snow was being blasted against the windows in violent sheets, turning the view outside into a churning wall of white chaos. The wind shrieked through the gaps in the stone, forcing air into the room that smelled of aviation fuel and ozone. Jason was screaming. He was jumping up and down in his heavy winter boots, looking like a man possessed by a fever dream. He ran to the center of the room, waving his arms at the ceiling, as if the pilot could see him through the slate roof. He reached into the deep pocket of his parka and pulled out a bulky orange device. I recognized it immediately. It was my emergency Iridium satellite phone, the one I kept in a locked waterproof box on the top shelf of the pantry he had sworn he hadn't touched. It is for me, Jason yelled, his voice cracking with hysterical triumph. It is my extraction team. I called them yesterday while you were pretending to sleep, old man. He held the phone up like a trophy, turning to Brittany with a wild grin. I found it in the oatmeal box, Jason shouted over the noise. I dialed the number for the contact in Zurich. The passport broker. I told him we had the gold. I told him we could pay double for a pickup. He sent a chopper. We are out of here, Em. We are gone. Brittany looked at the phone and then at Jason, and her face transformed. The fear vanished, replaced instantly by a sneer of absolute superiority. She dropped the knife. It clattered onto the concrete floor. a useless tool now that they had a better escape route. "You genius," she screamed, grabbing Jason's face and kissing him hard. "You brilliant man. You saved us." She turned to me. The mask of the desperate daughter-in-law fell away completely, leaving only the cold, hard face of a predator who has finished playing with its food. "Did you hear that, Conrad?" she shouted, stepping over the debris to get closer to me. "We don't need your signature. We don't need your permission. We are leaving. And we are going to send someone back for the gold once we are safe in a non-extradition country." She laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that cut through the mechanical roar from above. "Enjoy freezing to death in your ruin," she spat. She reached out to shove me back onto the cot, one final act of dominance before she walked out the door. Her hand aimed for my chest, expecting to find the frail, yielding body of a defeated 72-year-old man. But she did not find a frail old man. When her hand made contact, I did not stumble. I did not shrink away. I did not cough or wheeze or tremble. I caught her wrist. I moved with the speed and precision of a steel trap snapping shut. My grip was iron. I stopped her hand mid-air, holding it suspended in the space between us. Brittany froze. Her eyes went wide, locking onto mine. She pulled, trying to snatch her hand back, but I did not let go. I held her there for a long second, forcing her to look at me, forcing her to see that the cloudy, confused eyes she had been mocking for 3 days were now clear, sharp and burning with a cold intelligence. I stood up. I did not struggle to rise. I did not use the wall for support. I stood up smoothly, unfolding to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I rolled my shoulders back, shedding the hunch I had maintained for 72 hours. The transformation was physical and immediate. The grandfather was gone. The titan of industry, who had crushed union strikes and hostile takeovers, was back. I released her wrist with a dismissive flick, shoving her backward. She stumbled, losing her balance on her high heels, and fell hard onto her backside on the dirty floor. "What the hell?" Jason yelled, seeing his wife hit the ground. He stepped toward me, his fists balled. "What do you think you are doing?" "Sit down, Jason," I said. I did not shout. I did not scream. I spoke in a voice that was calm, deep, and commanding. It was a voice that was used to being obeyed by thousands of men. It cut through the noise of the helicopter like a blade. Jason stopped. He blinked, confused by the sudden change in my demeanor. I turned my back on them. I walked across the room. I did not shuffle. My stride was long and purposeful. I walked toward the far wall where a large, dirty canvas tarp hung, covering what looked like a pile of construction waste. "Where are you going?" Brittany shrieked, scrambling to her feet. "You can't stop us! The chopper is landing!" I ignored her. I reached the tarp. I grabbed the corner and ripped it down in one violent motion. The heavy canvas fell to the floor in a cloud of dust. Behind it was not a pile of rubble. Behind it was a gleaming stainless steel industrial control panel. It was sleek, modern, and pulsed with soft green LED indicators. It looked like something from the bridge of a submarine, not a derelict villa. Jason and Brittany stared at it, their mouths hanging open. "What is that?" Jason whispered, the satellite phone hanging limp in his hand. I looked at the panel. I looked at the master breaker switch, a large red lever in the center of the board. I had taped it in the off position 3 days ago. I reached out. I gripped the lever. "You said you wanted heat," I said, looking over my shoulder at them. "You said you wanted light. You said you wanted to see the real villa." I pulled the lever down. Clack. The sound was mechanical and heavy, a solid connection of copper and steel. For a split second, nothing happened. Then a low, powerful hum began to rise from beneath the floor. It was the sound of a massive industrial generator kicking into high gear. It vibrated through the soles of our shoes, a feeling of immense contained power waking up. And then the world changed. High above us in the vaulted ceiling, a bank of stadium-quality halogen floodlights flared to life. They didn't flicker. They exploded with light, turning the gloomy gray dungeon into a space brighter than noon. The sudden brilliance was blinding, forcing Jason and Brittany to shield their eyes. Simultaneously, the perimeter lighting kicked in. Warm amber architectural lights washed over the stone walls, highlighting the texture of the ancient brick not as rotting decay, but as preserved history. The cobwebs I had left were revealed to be mere dust on high-end acoustic baffling, but the biggest change was under our feet. The concrete slab, which had been a block of ice for 3 days, began to hum. The radiant heating system, buried inches below the surface, surged with hot glycol. The damp chill in the air began to evaporate instantly, replaced by a dry, comfortable warmth that rose from the ground up. The room was no longer a ruin. Under the harsh, unforgiving lights, the truth was laid bare. The wires hanging from the ceiling were not loose hazards. They were fiber optic cables waiting for the installation of a chandelier that cost more than Jason's entire fraudulent company. The rubble in the corner was actually crates of imported Italian marble tiles stacked and ready for laying. The cracked plastic table I had been eating off of was sitting next to a covered object. I reached out and pulled the dust sheet off that too. Underneath was not a pile of junk, but an architectural model of the villa. A pristine, detailed 3D model showing the finished museum complete with climate control security systems and a vault. I turned around to face my children. I stood in the center of the light, bathed in the warmth of my own creation. I adjusted my cuffs. I looked at them, cowering in the brightness, squinting against the revelation. The helicopter engine outside began to change pitch. It was idling down. The pilot had landed. Jason looked at the lights, then at the panel, then at me. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who had woken up in a different reality. "Dad," he stammered. "What? What is this? You said you were broke. You said the house was a wreck." I walked toward them slowly. The light reflected off the polished steel of the control panel behind me, creating a halo effect. "I lied," I said simply. I stopped 10 feet away from them. "I am not broke, Jason," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the acoustically treated hall. "I did not lose my fortune. I diversified it. This isn't a construction site for a senile old man. This is the Sterling Art Foundation. It is a $30 million preservation project." I pointed to the walls. "These aren't rotting bricks. This is 18th century masonry being restored by the same team that fixed the Colosseum. The wiring isn't dangerous. It is military-grade security. And the floor you have been sleeping on." I looked down at the concrete. It is a subfloor for a heated limestone surface that is sitting in crates in the garage. I turned the heat off 3 days ago. I turned the main breakers off 3 days ago. I lived in the cold and the dark, just to see what you would do. Brittany was trembling, but not from the cold anymore. She was trembling from the realization of the magnitude of the deception. You played us," she whispered. "I played you. I agreed. And you lost." The sound of the helicopter door opening whined from the courtyard. Heavy boots hit the stone porch. Jason looked at the door. Hope flared in his eyes one last time. "The pilot," he gasped. "He is here. He will take us. We have the phone. We have the deal." He turned to run to the door. "Go ahead, Jason," I said, crossing my arms. "Open the door. Greet your partner." Jason grabbed the handle. He threw the heavy oak door open, flooding the room with the noise of the rotors. But it wasn't a passport broker who stepped through the door. It wasn't a criminal contact from Zurich. Standing in the doorway, framed by the swirling snow and the flashing lights of the helicopter, were 3 men. They wore heavy tactical gear. On their chests in bold yellow letters were the words, "Polizei." And behind them, stepping out of the chopper in a long wool coat, was a man holding a briefcase. Arthur Stone. Jason froze. He dropped the satellite phone. It hit the warm concrete with a crack. "I didn't call a broker, Jason," I said from behind him. "That phone is monitored. I forwarded the GPS signal to the Swiss Federal Police an hour ago." I walked up behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder. This time my grip was not weak. It was heavy. Your ride is here, son, but you are not going to Zurich. Jason and Brittany stood frozen in the center of the room, but this time it was not from the cold. They were paralyzed by the sheer blinding reality that had just illuminated every corner of the great hall. The halogen floodlights hummed overhead, casting a stark, clinical brightness that left no shadow for them to hide in. The heat rising from the floor was not a subtle warmth anymore. It was a wave of expensive engineered climate control that was rapidly thawing the frost on the windows and the ice in their veins. They looked around, wildly, blinking against the glare. Their eyes darted from the gleaming control panel to the architectural lighting that bathed the ancient stone walls in gold, to the intricate model of the museum that sat on the table. The wires they thought were dangerous hazards were now clearly revealed as high-end fiber optic conduits, labeled with color-coded tags. The piles of rubble were actually carefully crated artifacts and imported materials stamped with customs seals from Italy and France. It was not a ruin. It was a masterpiece in progress. I watched the realization wash over them. It started in their eyes, a widening of shock, and then it moved to their mouths, which hung open in disbelief. Finally, it settled in their shoulders, which slumped under the weight of their own stupidity. They had spent 3 days shivering in a multi-million-dollar construction project, thinking it was a garbage dump because they lacked the vision to see past the dust sheets. Conrad Brittany whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes were fixed on the control panel behind me. What is all this? I walked toward them. My boots clicked sharply on the concrete, but now the sound was authoritative. I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms over my chest. The hunch was gone. The tremor was gone. The old man they thought they could bully was gone. You thought I was poor, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. You looked at this place and you saw a wreck. You saw failure. Because that is all you know how to see. You only see the surface. You never look at the foundation. I gestured to the vast room with a sweep of my hand. This is not a mistake, Brittany. This is not a bad investment. I bought this property for $30 million. Not because I was senile, but because it is one of the last remaining examples of 18th century Alpine fortification architecture. It is a designated historic monument. 30 million, Jason choked out. He looked sick. He looked at the floor he had been spitting on for 3 days. Yes, I continued. And I am spending another 10 million to restore it. But not for me. Not to live in. I walked over to the model on the table and tapped the glass case. This is the Sterling Art Foundation. I am building a private museum, a sanctuary for Renaissance art that needs climate-controlled preservation. That is why the walls are thick. That is why the security is military grade. That is why there is a satellite uplink on the roof. I turned back to them. I am not living here. I am working here. I am the project manager. Jason looked up at me, his face pale and sweaty. But the money. You said you were broke. You said you had no accounts. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I am broke, Jason. Technically. I took a step closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. I don't own this house. The foundation owns it. I don't own my car. The trust owns it. I don't have $18 million in a bank account waiting for you to steal it. That money was transferred into an irrevocable charitable trust 6 months ago. Every penny of my fortune is locked up tight, dedicated to the preservation of art and history. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. I draw a salary of $1 a year. I am just the caretaker, a poor caretaker living in a construction site. So I wasn't lying to you. You tried to rob a man who owns nothing. Brittany let out a strangled sob. She fell to her knees, not in supplication, but because her legs simply gave out. She stared at the floor, her hands gripping her expensive coat. And the gold, she gasped, looking up at me with wild, desperate eyes. The 50 bars in Zurich. The safety deposit box. I looked down at her with cold pity. There is no gold, Brittany. There is no box. There is no key. Her face crumbled. The hope that had sustained her through the storm, the greed that had driven her to hold a knife to my throat, vanished in an instant, leaving only a hollow terror. I made it up, I said simply. I invented a treasure because I needed to keep you here. I needed a carrot to dangle in front of you, so you wouldn't run into the storm and die before the police could arrive. I needed you to stay exactly where you were. Jason stared at me, his hands shaking. You kept us here. Yes, I said. And do you want to know why I turned off the heat? I walked over to the control panel and rested my hand on the red lever. The system has been operational for a week. I could have turned it on the moment you arrived. I could have given you a warm room. I could have cooked you a hot meal. I looked at them both, letting my gaze drift from Jason's terrified face to Brittany's tear-streaked cheeks. But I wanted to see who you really were. I wanted to strip away the luxury and the comfort and see what was underneath. I wanted to know if there was any humanity left in you, any love, any shred of decency that would make you treat your father with kindness, even if he had nothing to offer you. I pointed to the cot in the corner, where my gray wool blanket lay in a heap, the blanket Brittany had ripped from my hands the night before. I gave you 3 days, I said, my voice hardening into steel. 3 days to show me a single act of compassion. I froze with you. I starved with you. I gave you every opportunity to be decent human beings. I paused, letting the silence stretch. And what did you do? You complained, you plotted, you threatened me with a nursing home. You held a knife to my throat. I took a deep breath, letting the anger fuel me. But the final straw, Jason, was last night, when you stole my blanket. Jason flinched as if I had hit him. It was 15 degrees below zero, I said quietly. I am 72 years old. You took the only source of warmth I had, and you wrapped it around yourselves. You looked me in the eye, and you told me to do jumping jacks while you watched me freeze. That was the moment, I said. That was the moment you ceased to be my son. That was the moment I decided that I didn't care what happened to you anymore. You failed the test, Jason. You failed it in the most spectacular way possible. I looked at Brittany. And you are not a victim. You are the architect of this disaster. You drove him to this. You drove us all to this. I walked past them toward the open door where the wind was still swirling, but the police lights were now cutting through the snow. The gold was a lie, I said over my shoulder. But the prison sentence you are about to receive is very real. I stopped at the threshold and looked back at them one last time. They looked small under the bright lights of the museum. They looked like artifacts that had been dug up and found to be worthless. You wanted to move in, I said. You wanted a place to stay. I gestured to the police officers who were now marching up the steps, their weapons drawn. Well, you got your wish. You are going to be guests of the state for a very long time. I stepped aside as the tactical team rushed into the room shouting commands. I watched as my son and his wife were pulled from the floor and shoved against the expensive limestone walls. I watched the handcuffs click shut, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt warm. Truly warm. It wasn't the heaters. It was the burning, clean heat of justice. The room was suddenly filled with a chaotic energy that clashed violently with the serene museum lighting I had just activated. The tactical team moved with a precision that was terrifying to behold. They flowed into the hall like a dark tide, their boots heavy on the limestone floor, their voices barking commands in German and English. Get down, on the ground, now, hands behind your head, do not move. It was a wall of sound. Jason and Brittany did not stand a chance. They were not criminal masterminds. They were just two greedy, desperate people who had played a game they did not understand. They crumbled instantly. Jason dropped to his knees, his hands trembling in the air, tears streaming down his face. Brittany tried to back away, stumbling in her high heels until she hit the wall, her face a mask of sheer terror. Two officers grabbed Jason. They were not gentle. They forced him face down onto the warm floor, the same floor he had spat on hours earlier. I watched my son being restrained. I watched his cheek pressed against the stone. I watched his expensive coat being pulled roughly as his arms were wrenched behind his back. Brittany screamed as a female officer secured her. It was a high, thin sound that cut through the shouting. She was protesting, she was begging, she was trying to use her status as a shield, but here in this room with these men, status meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was the warrant. I stood by the control panel, my hands resting on the cool metal, watching the dismantling of my family. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt a profound, heavy sadness. But it was the sadness of a surgeon amputating a gangrenous limb. It was necessary. It was the only way to stop the rot. Through the open door, past the wall of tactical gear and swirling snow, another figure emerged. He moved slower than the police. He walked with a calm, deliberate gait that belonged in a boardroom, not a raid. He wore a long charcoal wool coat and a gray scarf. He stopped at the threshold and brushed a layer of fresh snow from his shoulders with a gloved hand. Arthur Stone. My lawyer. My confidant. The man who had helped me build my empire and now was helping me protect it. He stepped into the hall, his eyes scanning the scene before landing on me. He walked over, ignoring the shouting and the struggle happening feet away. He looked immaculate even in the middle of a blizzard. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance and for the delay. The storm was worse than we anticipated. The pilot had a hell of a time finding a window to land safely." I nodded, extending my hand. He shook it firmly. "You are right on time, Arthur," I said. "I was just finishing the tour." Stone looked down at Jason, who was now handcuffed and being hauled to his feet. He looked at Brittany, who was sobbing hysterically as she was marched toward the door. "I see that," Stone said dryly. "It looks like the guests are ready to depart." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. He walked over to where the two FBI agents were standing. They were distinct from the Swiss police, wearing windbreakers with the bold yellow letters FBI on the back. They had come a long way for this. Stone handed them the folder. One of the agents, a tall man with a buzz cut, nodded to Stone and then turned to Jason. He stepped into Jason's personal space, holding up a laminated piece of paper. "Jason Sterling," the agent said, his voice carrying over the noise of the dying helicopter engine. "You are under arrest, pursuant to an Interpol red notice issued at the request of the United States Department of Justice." Jason blinked, his eyes red and swollen. "Red notice," he whispered. "You are charged with wire fraud securities, fraud money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." The agent continued reciting the list of sins that my son had committed. "You are also charged with flight to avoid prosecution. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Brittany was next. The agent turned to her. She was shaking her head violently, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. "Brittany Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, aiding and abetting a fugitive, and obstruction of justice." "No," Brittany screamed, pulling against the cuffs. "No, I didn't know. He did it. It was all him. I am just his wife. I am a victim here." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Conrad, tell them. Tell them I tried to stop him. Tell them I wanted to stay." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had held a knife to my throat 10 minutes ago. I looked at the woman who had stolen my blanket and left me to freeze. "She is lying," I said to the agent. "She is the architect. She knew everything. Brittany let out a wail of despair as the female officer pushed her toward the door. Jason stopped struggling. He looked at me. He looked at the warm lights of the museum. He looked at the father he had underestimated for his entire life. "Dad," he choked out. His voice was broken. "Dad, you Gaibe Khan. You trapped us. You knew. You knew we were being chased. You knew about the warrant." I walked closer to him. I stopped just out of reach. "I didn't trap you, Jason," I said. "You trapped yourself the moment you stole that money. You trapped yourself the moment you bought a one-way ticket. I just provided the venue for your capture." "But you played us," he cried, tears dripping off his nose. "You made us think you were broke. You made us think there was gold. You watched us freeze for 3 days. Why? Why would you do that to your own blood?" "Because I had to know," I said softly. "I had to know if there was anything left in you worth saving. I had to know if you were just a fool or if you were a monster." I pointed to the spot on the floor where they had huddled under my stolen blanket. "When you took that blanket, Jason, you answered the question. You chose your comfort over my life. You showed me exactly who you are." Jason hung his head, his shoulders sobbing. "We are going to prison," he whispered. "Federal prison. For 20 years. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "You are, but look on the bright side, son." I leaned in close so only he could hear me over the wind. "It is a federal facility. It is solid. It is secure. And unlike this villa when the power is off, it has central heating. You won't be cold there, Jason. You will have a bed. You will have 3 meals a day. It is the shelter you came here looking for." I stepped back. "You wanted a place to stay," I said, raising my voice so the agents could hear. "Well, I found you one. It is safe. It is warm. And it is exactly where you belong." "Take them away," I said to the agent. The agent nodded. He signaled to the team. "Let's move." They began to march them out. Jason stumbled, his boots dragging on the floor. He looked back at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, only a profound realization of what he had lost. He had lost his freedom. He had lost his inheritance. And he had lost his father. I watched them go. I watched them being led out into the storm, into the waiting helicopter that would take them to a holding cell in Zurich, and then a plane back to New York. I watched the door close behind them, shutting out the wind and the snow. The silence returned to the hall. But this time it wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a sanctuary. Stone walked over to me. He stood by my side, looking at the closed door. "That was hard," he said quietly. "Yes," I said. "It was." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flask. He unscrewed the cap and handed it to me. "Brandy," he said, "to warm you up." I took the flask. I took a long swallow. The liquid burned pleasantly in my throat, chasing away the last of the chill. "I am not cold." "Arthur," I said, handing it back. "I haven't been cold since I turned the lights on." Stone smiled a small, sad smile. "What now, Conrad?" he asked. "The police will need a statement. The extradition hearings will take a few weeks. Do you want to come back to New York? I can book you a hotel." "The Plaza." I looked around the great hall. I looked at the stone arches glowing under the amber lights. I looked at the model of the museum. I looked at the potential. "No," I said. "I am staying." Stone looked surprised. "Here. Alone." "I am not alone," I said. "I have my work, I have this building, I have a museum to finish." I walked over to the control panel and adjusted a dial, bringing the lights down to a warm evening glow. "Besides," I said, "I think I finally have the peace and quiet I was looking for." I looked at the spot where the luggage had been piled, where the greed and the desperation had stained the floor. It was empty now. Clean. I am home, Arthur, I said. Truly home. Stone nodded. He buttoned his coat. I will handle the press, he said. And the lawyers. You won't have to deal with them. Thank you, I said. He turned to leave. He paused at the door. Conrad, he said. Yes. You are a good man. Don't let them make you think otherwise. You did what you had to do, I know, I said. He opened the door and stepped out into the snow. I listened until the sound of the helicopter spun up again, lifting off into the white sky, carrying my past away with it. I was alone. The villa was warm. The lights were bright. And for the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly free. It has been 7 days since the helicopter lifted off into the gray sky, carrying the wreckage of my past with it. The storm has broken completely. The sky above the Alps is a piercing, brilliant blue that hurts the eyes if you look at it too long. The villa is alive again, but this time it is the life of creation, not destruction. I am sitting on the south balcony wrapped in a thick shearling coat, my hands cupped around a ceramic mug of steaming mulled wine. The air smells of cloves, cinnamon, and the crisp, clean scent of pine resin. Behind me inside the great hall, the silence has been replaced by the purposeful noise of industry. A team of artisans from Milan is currently erecting a scaffolding tower in the center of the room. They are shouting instructions in Italian, hoisting a crate that contains the real chandelier. It is a 1920s Murano glass masterpiece that I bought at auction in Venice 3 months ago. It is delicate and heavy at the same time, much like the freedom I am feeling right now. Mr. Stone is sitting opposite me. He looks out of place in the bright sunlight, still dressed in his city wools. He has a leather folio open on his lap. The wind ruffles the pages, but he holds them down with a heavy gold pen. He looks at me over the rim of his glasses. The extradition was processed this morning. Conrad, he says, his voice competing with the sound of a saw buzzing inside. The Swiss authorities handed them over to the U.S. Marshals at Zurich Airport an hour ago. They are currently on a transport plane bound for New York. I take a sip of the wine, letting the heat spread through my chest. And the charges, I ask. Stone looks down at the paper. They are substantial. The federal prosecutor is not looking to make a deal. Given the amount of money stolen, the number of victims, and the attempt to flee the jurisdiction, they are looking at 20 years minimum, likely more. They will be old people when they see the outside world again. 20 years. I look out at the jagged white peaks of the mountains. 20 years is a lifetime. I will be 92 when they are released. I will likely be dead. This is it then. This is the end of the line. Stone slides a single sheet of paper across the small iron table. There is one last thing, Conrad. Jason's public defender reached out. They are requesting a bail hearing. They are asking if you are willing to post collateral. They want to know if you will put the villa up as bond. I look at the paper. It is a standard affidavit of surety. A promise to pay. A promise to be responsible for them one last time. I pick up the pen. It is heavy and cool in my hand. I remember the plastic pen I broke 3 days ago when I was pretending to be weak. I remember the knife Brittany held to my throat. I remember the cold. I do not hesitate. I do not tremble. I draw a large X through the signature line. No, I say softly. No bail. No bond. No lawyers paid for by the trust. They are on their own, Arthur. Completely on their own. Stone nods. He takes the paper back and closes the folio, snapping the lock shut. I will convey your decision, he says. It is done. He stands up and walks to the railing, looking out at the valley below. You know, Conrad, he says quietly, most people would say you are cruel. To leave your own son in a cell. I stand up and join him. I lean against the stone balustrade. Cruelty is letting a parasite kill the host, I say. Cruelty is enabling a monster until it destroys everything around it. I am not being cruel, Arthur. I am being just. I gave them a life of privilege and they used it to hurt people. Now they have to pay the bill. Stone turns to me and offers his hand. I have to head back to the city. The foundation paperwork needs to be finalized. Enjoy your museum, Conrad. I shake his hand. Safe travels, Arthur. He leaves, walking back through the great hall, disappearing into the bustle of the workers. I am alone on the balcony. I look out at the vast expanse of snow and rock. It is a harsh landscape, but it is beautiful. It is honest. The mountain does not lie to you. It does not pretend to love you to get your money. It just is. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs with the thin, cold air. I feel a pang of loneliness, yes. It is a sharp ache in the center of my chest. I have no family left. No one will visit me on holidays. No one will call me on my birthday. I am the last of my line. But then I look at the mug in my hand. It is warm. I look at the villa behind me. It is safe. I look at the future stretching out before me. It is mine. I am alone. But I am not lonely. I am solitary. There is a difference. I raise my glass to the mountains, to the silence, to the cold that revealed the truth. To freedom, I whisper. I drink the wine. It tastes of spices and victory. I turn my back on the view and walk into my house, ready to build something that will last longer than blood, longer than greed, and longer than me. We often cling to toxic relationships simply because we share DNA with the people hurting us. We confuse shared history with loyalty, and we confuse endurance with love. But this story teaches us a brutal, necessary truth. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep others warm. When family becomes a predator, when they view your existence solely as a resource to be exploited, you have the right to close the door. Protecting your peace is not selfishness. It is survival. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own actions. If you agree that peace of mind is worth more than any inheritance, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and resilience.